for tonight's session. Thank you very much for making time for tonight. And for our event, AI talk, AI and ethics, how do they meet? Our special guest for tonight, of course, the question, how do they meet, and connected, related, relevant issues with that will be answered by our special guest tonight. Of course, this we'll start with starting with Mr. Janshu Wang. He is
hello everyone. Yeah.
Hi. Okay. Let me just introduce you all three for our participants tonight. Mr. Janshu Wang is the head of Secure AI Lab at AI Singapore. Secure AI team develops processes and tools to make machine learning more robust against potential attacks. Janshu is also the head of Federated Learning Lab, where he is working with the team to build Synergos. It's a platform to make federated learning more user-friendly and sustainable. Janshu has many years of AI and data science research and consulting experience. In recent years, he has spent most of his time in putting AI and machine learning into real-world usage and promoting ethical aspects of AI and machine learning. This includes explainability, fairness, robustness, privacy, preserving AI and machine learning models. Before joining AISG, he was the head of insights and modeling of a leading global reinsurer, where he led his team to deliver a number of significant data science projects for its key clients in the Asia-Pacific region. Janshu obtained his PhD in computer science from Nanyang Technological University of Singapore in 2008. Our next guest tonight, Mr. Lee Ji-en. Hi, Ji-en. Say hello to
Hi, everyone.
Audience. Hi. Yeah.
Good evening.
Mr. Ji-en is a dispute resolution lawyer based in Singapore. His practice is focused on commercial litigation, international arbitration, and alternative disputes resolution. Prior to joining Ascendant Legal, Ji-en spent 2.5 years at a local dispute firm, which provided him with extensive advocacy experience in both civil and criminal disputes resolution. During that period, he argued in the Singapore High Court and Court of Appeal and worked with leading Queen's Counsel on various complex and high-profile matters. Ji-en is also one of the leaders in the legal tech and legal innovation scene in Asia Pacific. He is the deputy chair of the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation and Technology Association, and he speaks regularly on issues related to technology and innovation in law. He also sits in working group formed by the Singapore Computer Society and Singapore Academy of Law to help Singapore government develop strategies for the legal workforce in view of technological disruption in the industry. And of course, last but not the least, tonight's discussion will be moderated by one of our professors in SUSS. We have Mr. Jacob Mok.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, Mr. Jacob Mok has a master's in arts and a bachelor in arts with first class of honors in philosophy from National University of Singapore. He has taught philosophy, logic, argument, and social sciences courses at NUS and the Singapore University of Social Sciences. He has been the course chair and leader for several of these courses in SUSS for close to 10 years. His academic interests include general epistemology, emergence and complexity, the philosophy of science and social sciences, the epistemic impact of theoretical modeling, ethics, and memetics. And with that introduction, I will now pass the floor to Mr. Jacob.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. So, hi everyone. My name is Jacob, and I will be the moderator for this evening's panel discussion on AI and ethics. Joining me, like stated earlier on said panel, are Jianshu and Jian. Really a warm welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us, at least virtually, right, at SUSS. So maybe to start the ball rolling, and for the benefit of all here, both of you, or maybe Jianshu specifically, maybe you can help us better understand what AI is. How does it differ from conventional computing software or algorithms of the past? And maybe where does machine learning even fit in here?
Yeah. Thanks. First of all, I think thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here to share some of the topics I personally felt quite passionate about, right? Okay, then now going to the question which Jacob, you mentioned, right? So what is AI, right? Artificial intelligence. I think AI is certainly not really a new thing, right? I think if you look at the history, right, it probably started from a few years, a few decades back, right, or 1950s. And after that, I think there's it went through. If you're old enough, right, you probably will see there's in the past, there's about probably two so-called AI winters, right? And the main reason, I guess, is because there's too much hype, and then AI doesn't really deliver its promise, right? But just now you also mentioned about machine learning, right? Machine learning in the recent years is quite popular, right? And then, in fact, if you look at the, usually when we try to talk about the relationship between machine learning and AI, right? So usually, in a way, we view machine learning as a way to achieve artificial intelligence, right? So in a way, in fact, it's not AI. There's multiple ways to achieve so-called AI, right? Just now I mentioned about the two AI winters. Previously, machine learning is not a dominant approach, right? There's some other approach like so-called symbolic expert system, right? So basically, we look into logic. First of all, I think we try logic, try to use the logic to try to instill some form of intelligence to the machine, right? But it just doesn't really deliver its promise, right? And then subsequently, as well, right? But it just happens so that in the recent years, machine learning is more promising in a way. Machine learning at the end of the day is really about trying to identify some form of a patterns from the data which we have. Of course, the data need to be clean and quantity-wise to be, quality and quantity, both quantity and quality should be sufficient enough for us to derive some useful patterns, right? And then after you derive the pattern, you try to apply it into the new data which the machine sees, right? Then the machine trying to infer, oh, okay, this one looks like similar to something which I saw before, right? So most likely to be the thing that I saw before, right? Maybe I can, if I may use a kind of everyday example, right? Just a bit like we're trying to teach young kids to learn to recognize animals, right? So usually we don't really go by so-called rules or logics, right? So okay, baby, if you look at this animal and it is, let's say, like 5 centimeters long and then 2 centimeters high, and then with this color of fur, it's more likely to be a cat or more likely to be a dog, right? Of course, you can do that, right? But usually we don't, right? Or we don't really do that. But what we usually do is we point baby a number of examples, right? So maybe this is an animal is called cat, and this is another animal called dog, right? So after we point baby to enough number of samples, and baby, the human brain is smart enough in a way that he will try to recognize, oh, this animal is cat, right? This type of animal is cat. This type of animal is dog, right? And then when in future, if the baby sees another animal, we somehow looks very similar to cat or dog he or she sees before, right? And he will say, oh, this is also a cat, or this is also a dog, right? So this, in a way, it is basically in a nutshell, is what machine learning is. In a way, is, in a very simple sense, what really machine learning is trying to do, right? It's trying to pick up some patterns from the data, right? Data basically like some form of it can be any type of data, right? It can be text or tabular data or image data, right? So I think this is something that machine does much better than human, right? And so that's why we see a lot of useful applications in the past what I call it, the past few probably like 10 or 20 years, right? Especially because of the development of deep learning, right? Because it has a very efficient way to extract patterns from huge amount of data, right? So I think that's probably, yeah, just maybe a slightly a longer version or to your simple question: what is AI and what is machine learning, right? But yeah, I mean, in summary, is basically the machine learning is just one way to achieve AI. It doesn't mean that it is the most the only one, right? It is just one of the multiple ways, but it also has its drawbacks, right? I mean, people also start to realize, yeah, machine learning is promising, but it also has its drawbacks as well, right? And if we're talking about what machine learning is really just trying to extract some patterns, right? Yeah.
So just to clarify, AI is just this large umbrella term for any kind of sophisticated algorithm. And machine learning is just one of the myriad ways that we can get there. It's just an increasingly more popular way.
Right.
I think one of the things that you talked about earlier in your example that you gave us of machine learning with regard to pattern recognition, you're feeding it data and there's a sense in which it recognizes patterns really quickly. One of the things that I think immediately comes to mind, like one of the most obvious use cases that sometimes appears on the news is things like surveillance, right? Where human beings are really good at recognizing faces, and machine learning has now given us a new way of imparting that skill or ability to certain kinds of AI systems. So I think privacy and surveillance issues is really kind of an elephant in the room that I think a lot of maybe audience members might be thinking about. Whenever they think of AI, they think of security systems and surveillance systems and cameras and facial recognition in like places like China, and also I'm very sure the Singapore government, I'm incredibly sure. But I think one of the concerns that arises whenever people talk about AI and these sort of concerns is we're really worried about privacy invasion and surveillance, right? We've got advanced facial recognition and identification technologies, and even in things like vast amounts of data from social media and our devices, that otherwise wouldn't have been easy to analyze before. But now with certain AI algorithms, we've gotten really good at analyzing that data, such that we can even generate individual models of behavior. So do you both think that this fear about AI and machine learning amplifying these concerns about privacy and infotech? Because the concerns have actually always been there. Do you guys think that this concern about AI amplifying these already existing concerns, is that a genuinely warranted fear, or is that are we overblowing it? Maybe I can hear from Jianchu first and then Jian.
Sure, yeah. So my personal view, certainly it's a valid concern, right? I mean, maybe give an example. I mean, recently, in fact, there's multiple jurisdictions, multiple countries are looking to this issue, right? The most recent ones, I guess, would be most what do you call it? We hear the most from the news is probably EU is rolling out its so-called the draft AI regulation. Of course, it's not really like cast in stone yet. It's still probably under discussion. Probably will take a few more years, but probably roughly will know where the direction will go, right? So in there, they basically classify like different category of AI, so-called AI applications, right? Yeah, for sure, right? There will be. I mean, as you mentioned, right? Previously, maybe technology is not that advanced, right? But now technology is advancing so fast, right? Give human really, in a way, the capability or the government the capability to really do large scale surveillance, right? So I mean, to me, I guess certainly the concern is there, right? So that's why I think countries like, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, EU and things like that are looking into that. So for some, like let's say high risk what do you call it, the applications or high risk scenarios, they will right away just ban the usage of things like facial recognition and surveillance, right? That's one. Another one, I mean, of course, but I guess on the other hand, there will also be the other side of the equation, right? Because let's say, for example, for law enforcement, I mean, this kind of technology indeed will help, right? I guess this is probably also something that we need to look into as well. If I'm not wrong, I think EU regulation also leave some form of space for that kind of a usage as well, right? So I think we need to find a balance, right? But where would be the balance? I guess this is probably something every country or every jurisdiction probably need to answer from. I mean, that's my personal view, right? Because But I guess generally, my personal view is a bit like this, right? If you're really doing some form of a surveillance or anything that would be intruding into the humans' so-called privacy or personal data, right? I guess first of all, you probably need to let the subject know that you are doing this, right? And you also give them the chance to say, I don't want to be subject to that kind of automatic processing, right? I guess this probably will be the bare minimum. At least you need to notify them and need to get the consent for them to do process. But sometimes I think we just, just take it as a granted or say, oh, somehow your data is there, I just go ahead and analyze it, right? So I think privacy certainly is a major issue over there. I'm not just talking about the surveillance. Surveillance, of course, is probably too glaring, right? There's also a sensitive sensitivity over there, right? But in general, I think certainly yes, because going back to my earlier point, right? So AI is really nowadays is really live on the big amount of data, right? The data, I mean, of course, to a large extent, is really generate because of the human activity, right? So from the data, you can analyze a lot of things about a human. Right, so certainly there's a lot of things about that, and then even things like a GDPR and things like that. Although they are talking about protection of data, but there's always in GDPR there's also an article, Article 22, talk about automatic decision making. Right, I mean that's something that I guess in the same spirit as the one I mentioned earlier on. So you need to let the user data subject know that you are doing automatic automatic decision making, right? Then they should have the right to say, no, I don't want to be subject to that. Of course, there will be some complications and implications, right? But I think you need to give them the rights to say no, right? Or I don't want to, right? Yeah. So I think that's probably there will always be a balance, but how do we really do the balance is really up to the jurisdiction to really find a balance. Yeah, different country may have a different priorities or different thoughts behind that. But to me, yes, we on one hand we need to protect the privacy. On the other hand, we also need to look into the utility of this kind of technology. Right.
So
yeah,
I suppose what I'm hearing a lot is about like informed consent, right? Tian, agree, especially in your capacity as an experienced advocate and solicitor.
Well, I think the first question that you asked, and your question is whether the fear is a real one or is it just overblown. I think the general sense is that if you pay attention to what the technology is capable of doing, I think you can say that the concern is a real one, because today the extent to which someone can track you down and can extrapolate whatever all the different data sources and try to figure out your behavior, it's the technology, I think, is more or less there, and everyone's of course fighting for data. And what Jinshu mentioned just now in terms of giving or obtaining consent, it's something that I'm not sure if it's possible in all cases, because say for example, we're not even going into the realm of say the use by public authorities in surveillance, but also just for instance, I think there's is it Amazon or one of the tech companies you could put out which puts a camera in front of your house to sort of and sort of your home camera essentially, but if that home camera captures so much footage outside and everyone's sort of walking past your house and so on, and this footage can be potentially used for various reasons, and it's just not possible for you to go and say I'm not giving you consent to record whatever that I'm doing. So that becomes an issue. And on this issue, I think I absolutely agree with Jinshu in terms of every country will have, or every region will have different kind of balance, and in EU right now, the sense is that whenever the information that you have contains some sort of biometric identification capability, these would be considered very high risk and should be subject to very strict requirements. So they need all these systems to meet certain strict obligations before they can even be put on the market. So that essentially it's some sort of a risk assessment that they're doing. Some people agree, some people disagree, but I think the idea, the principles that we're looking at are quite universal. So they want there to be adequate risk assessment and mitigation systems, to have sort of very high quality data sets to minimize risk and discriminatory outcomes, and to log the activity to ensure traceability of results, so that if something goes wrong, we can go back and see what happened, right? So these are just some examples, and so we have all these issues that we need to consider, but every jurisdiction will probably reach a different sort of balance, especially in terms of different the usage in different kind of contexts.
So, Tian, if I can pick your brain, especially as a lawyer operating presumably in a local context, we've heard PDPA thrown around a little bit, and I suppose that's a first step to ensuring maybe stronger data protection laws, especially in light of our current environment with regard to big data and how easy it is to capture so much of it. Do you think PDPA is enough? Is it a right first step in the right direction? Is that all there is, or do you think much more probably needs to be done?
I think much more needs to be done. Yeah, I think PDPA is the first step, but and I think the government knows that as well, and that's why they have this thing called the AI Model Governance Framework. I think it's a matter of time where they will come up with something a bit more force. Now it's very much of a framework. People are encouraged to follow it, but there will come a time where once Singapore has a better sense as to what everyone is doing, and the current preference is not to take a more light touch approach, to not stifle innovation, but at a certain point they will need to say certain duties needs to be followed, especially with Europe coming in. So a lot of it depends on the different dynamics around the world. If, for instance, Europe imposes a certain standard, then a lot of actually Singapore businesses would end up having to follow the same standards as well, because we might operate in those jurisdictions. And it's just sort of like how when Europe came out with GDPR, it almost became a de facto standard in many other jurisdictions which do not initially have similar kind of standards. So it all depends on that, and I think more will be done, because these are issues that are being discussed, being studied even in Singapore. And when it comes to PDPA, there are certain areas where I think we are a bit more relaxed. For instance, PDPC doesn't quite apply to the governments. So there might be some sense as to, in order to give more, create more public trust as to how AI is being used by the state, they might want to explain, just as in other jurisdictions, how it would be used and what kind of systems will be put in place to ensure that that the data won't be misused.
So I see. So if I can maybe summarize that, I mean, there's a sense in which what you're saying is that our regulations will frankly be the result of economic considerations, so that we can do good business with other people. I mean, in a sense, there's almost some analogy to like emission standards, where we try to ensure compliance largely to ensure that we can do smooth business with other countries, right?
I think it's not just as to emissions, because in emissions we are a smaller player. When it comes to, we're not a big economy in that sense. But when it comes to data, I think there are some people and some leaders in Singapore who would think that Singapore can play a much bigger role when it comes to data, because data can reside anywhere. So one of the things is, can we create a framework that's favorable for this kind of innovation in Singapore, so as to encourage this kind of sort of businesses to come into Singapore and operate here as a base. And some people, I've heard recently this term where they say Singapore can be the knowledge capital of the world. So in a way, we probably would take a more sort of progressive, and we'll want to have some sort of leadership in this kind of governance.
Yeah, I suppose Jian-Shu should be quite familiar with that, working in AI and getting funding from the National Research Foundation, which is part of like the Prime Minister's office. I mean, I can understand Singapore trying to push for a leadership position there. I think related to one of the things that we've been talking about, whenever we talk about big data, and it's really kind of how that data is going to be used. We've also been talking about governmental use of that data. So, I mean, when we think of some of the things like, for example, the Cambridge Analytica scandal. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with it, it's a scandal with Facebook where a particular data mining company found a way to use that data to, and it was sold in a way that could be used to theoretically influence certain political outcomes in the US. The jury's still out on whether that actually has happened or not. I suppose there's this concern about how data that's collected and analyzed by AI systems might be used to manipulate things like public opinion, like in the Cambridge Analytica case, or even public larger behavior, right? How real or possible is this based on your understanding of current AI systems or capabilities? Maybe Tian, you can start the ball rolling.
Actually, I would defer to Jane Shu first in terms of technical capabilities.
Sure,
maybe discuss the other things.
Start us going.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, technically speaking, right, at a high level, yes, it is possible, right? It is possible. But I want to leave it with that. But I want to take a step back, right? In fact, in a way, so-called manipulating the public opinion or public behavior, right? These things has been happening for decades, right? This is, I mean, to a certain extent, again, it's not really a new thing, right? I think, I guess probably a lot of people read about a book, right? Thinking Slow and Fast, right? So it's a very good book about behavioral economics, basically, right? So over there, you can see that a lot of patterns and a lot of very interesting examples as well, right? I mean, of course, they don't really use a word of so-called opinion or manipulation. They use a very interesting word called nudge, right? So in a way, there's also another book called Nudge. So basically, in a way, you try to craft your message in a way to get the results which you want, right? You try to nudge people into a certain direction, right? But you give them the feeling, oh, I'm really making a autonomous decision, right? So this whole thing has been happening for decades. Advertisement, same, right? I mean, when you go out from your room, you look at the advertisement that they carry by the bus or maybe taxi or whatever, right? We see this, and then again, in a way that they don't really force you to buy certain things, but just in a way that you are kind of a nudge to say, oh, this is something that's very cool, I'm gonna try it, right? So I mean, if you look at that, manipulating of the human behavior or opinions always happen, right? But of course, how effective that can be, right? That's always a question, right? How effective that can be, right? But just that now, with that in mind, right? I mean, the manipulation of the public opinion is always there, but the question is how effective that can be, right? Now, look at the other side. Social media is so popular. Everybody is using social media, right? And then, of course, those social media companies, I mean, everybody would know that for them, maybe one of the things is really driving their growth is really about they try to get more engagement, more attention from the users, right? As long as anything that they will get people to be more sticky to their platform, they will push for it, right? So in a way, I mean, you look at this from angle. I mean, these two things. I mean, like it seems to me there's quite a good combination, right? You try to mine the huge user base, and then there's a lot of they leave a lot of trace, right? I mean, social media posts or whatever, and then to help those what do you call it, the companies or maybe companies try to understand their customer in a better way, right? So that they can, in a way, they try to influence or nudge you in a more effective way, right? So technically, it is possible, right? It is possible. And then I mean, again, Facebook, that kind of company, right? They do have a lot of amount of data, right? So they can really do so-called profiling of the user to a very to a certain extent, it can be quite accurate. To a certain extent, it can be quite useful, right? So I think from a technical point of view, yes, it is possible, right? But take a step back. I mean, as I mentioned, right? I mean, it's been happening for quite many decades, right? Just that AI or technology or the data availability has really pushed it to the next, probably a next level, right? So I guess that's probably the way I would see it. Yeah, but of course now people start to realize, I mean, there's a lot of issues, right? I mean, Facebook himself will also see it's a kind of an issue, right? But as I mentioned, fundamentally for them, they are, I mean, it is for, no matter what, they are kind of a for-profit company, right? If anything that they can really like make them making more money in a way, they can making them like to get their user more user engagement from the user base, I guess they will still go for it. Right, so I think that ones will still be there, but of course now they are also saying, okay, they can't, you can't really use it to for political campaign usage, right? So this is probably in a way the one way that they try to prevent probably the similar situation from happening again, right? But you probably didn't really see them saying, okay, you can't really use the platform to do advertisement. You still need to leverage the platform to do advertisement. But again, going to my earlier point, advertisement in a way is also another way of behavior, opinion manipulation, right? Just that the consequences is different, right? Consequences is different. Yeah, of course, I think there are some changes to the Facebook and social media kind of practice, right? But I think it's still, yeah, I guess the possibility of, just I mean talking about the technical probability, right? I guess it is possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Maybe Tian.
Yeah, I agree with what Tian says, and when I was thinking about the problem, I had the same approach in that we really need to take a step back to see, first of all, even before AI came into place, right? Do we regulate this issue of behavior manipulation? We don't really. And the idea has always been that in certain societies, the idea is about free speech. So whenever someone tries to manipulate one way, there can be a counterforce. Someone can try to manipulate you in the other way, right? So as long as you have a free and open kind of platform, people can do whatever they want. But of course, now it's a bit different with certain social media platforms. The companies can control the entire discourse on that platform, and the platform is so expansive into such that they control so many aspects of or influence so many aspects of people's lives. So in the sense, as Tinshu says, the consequences now can be a bit more severe. But we still have to figure out, even though with more severe consequences, we still have to figure out where do we draw the line, what is considered manipulation, what is not considered manipulation. I think the general sense right now is we are in a world where people are a bit more okay with regulating disinformation, so the spreading of news that are false or give certain suggestions that are misleading. But yeah, manipulation is something that's very hard to deal with. And I think in a way, if we look at internet, when it first started, one can say that it actually benefits the sort of smaller players, because they could provide a sort of diversity in opinion to a broader group of people, right? So we do have quite a number of countervailing factors to consider, and I think we'll probably move towards an area where, similar to what we talked about earlier in terms of informed consent, what will happen is you end up having social media platforms maybe saying, you are seeing this political post because you subscribe to or you seem to support all these people, and this is sponsored. That kind of practices, as Tinshu says, slowly developing, and we'll see where it goes. But it's not an easy issue to deal with at all.
Yeah, and this one I really agree with Dion was saying, right? I mean, like, where's the line, right? I mean, because technically speaking, at the end of the day, it's really something they call it a recommendation system, right? Recommendation system. I mean, we see a lot of benefits in e-commerce kind of application, right? You go and visit and buy something, and then maybe tomorrow you will see, they will suggest you like similar or relevant items which are similar to the one which you just bought or you just browsed. Right? So in a way, it really gives us a lot of convenience, right? But I mean, if you look deeper, basically the mechanism is about the same, right? You read something in Facebook or any social media, right? You click on that, you read it, and then they might say, okay, this is probably something you want, so I'm gonna push you something similar, right? Then to a certain extent, it becomes an echo chamber, right? Because maybe within your friend circle, your friends always like this one, because in Facebook and this kind of a thing, because there's also another, they not just look at your contents, right? They also look into your so-called your connection, your friends, right? If your friend reading something, then probably they will suggest you something similar to you as well, right? Then it really become an echo chamber, right? So if somehow your friend is reading this and you saw your friend like this one, you also try to take a look at that. Maybe you are not really of the same opinion, right? But somehow because you click on that, because from algorithm point of view, for some algorithm, they don't really differentiate whether you are for it or you're against it, right? But to them, they just take it as a kind of engagement, as I mentioned earlier on. They really look into engagement. So the moment you click on it, then they take it, oh, this is a kind of engagement, and then try to mine it, and then say, oh, maybe I will push similar content to you, right? So then in a way, but I mean, if you put these two aside, either you're recommending a merchandise or a product versus recommending me another piece of news or editorial, right? I guess it's basically just recommending an item. But the item carry different weights, different implications, different consequences. Buying a product doesn't matter. Oh, you give me a rubbish. The worst is I don't buy it. I don't look at it. But you push me something, again, the kind of influence is probably a bit intangible, right? But it did play a role there, right? So technically, yes, it is possible, and it's getting probably, as I mentioned earlier, probably to the next level, right? But yeah, where's the line? Again, so where's the line, right? I mean, as Jim mentioned, where do we draw the line? Are you manipulating the opinion, right? I guess that's probably something. Yeah.
I think one of the things that both of you touched on, I think is really quite appropriate and salient. In a sense, some of these problems have always been there. Even the echo chamber problem has kind of always been there. I mean, nothing's stopping me from only hanging out with people who agree with me, right? But I think maybe there's something to be said about big data giving us the illusion of some kind of critical consensus. I mean, it's very easy to log on and be fed only the kind of thing that you want to see, while at the same time thinking, wow, everyone else agrees with me. This is actually what everyone else thinks.
Yeah.
But I think that's you're absolutely right that in a sense, big data can take this to the next level. The problem has kind of always been there.
Amplified, yeah.
It's really been amplified, and maybe there's a slightly new dimension because you don't even know there's a problem. Whereas previously you could always tell that you're hanging out with people that you liked and that agreed with you, and now it's hard to tell that that's effectively what you're doing online. I think this is a great opportunity to segue into another issue that's actually closely related to this. I think one of the things that makes a lot of people kind of leery and a bit cautious about AI and AI mined data or machine learning kind of data that's used eventually for somewhat more questionable purposes like opinion manipulation and what have you, really also stems, I think, from a concern that a lot of people don't really understand AI. For a lot of them, AI and machine learning seems a little bit of a black box, right? Not just to laypersons, but even sometimes to experts. So AI systems and especially machine learning systems are sometimes a bit opaque in the sense that the exact means by which the predictive analytics that are generated from them are not always as robustly understood as we'd like. And as you've pointed out much earlier, Chen-Tru, any machine learning algorithm is really only as good as the data that we feed it in the first place. With concerns about unintentionally biased data that we feed to some of our machine learning algorithms and related concerns, does this kind of pose a problem when we use AI or machine learning systems to inform things like policy decisions or decision making, maybe in sectors like healthcare, finance, criminology, or even the legal sector? I know Tian is quite an expert in the legal sphere, and I know that the legal sphere is now actually pivoting a little bit to using AI for certain things, putting some lawyers out of a job actually and making it difficult for them to get training contracts. So what do you guys think? Maybe Tian, you could chime in first before we get to Tian-Shu.
So I think it's a real problem. And so going back to the EU example, it's something that they're trying to tackle. That's why there's this draft framework out there. And these are some of the high-risk systems that they're looking at in terms of systems being used in relation to administration of justice, or certain law enforcement sort of systems and critical infrastructures that we're looking at, where this issue of what you mentioned in terms of AI systems being opaque, and potential for and I suppose potential for discrimination, for bias is something that is a bit more sensitive, and it could genuinely affect another person's rights. These areas are being sort of looked at with a bit of like a microscope to see how we want to balance it, because there are plenty of examples out there actually. If you look at US in terms of the use of AI, it's okay. Maybe it's not the AI that we see today, but it's still some sort of an algorithmic mechanism to determine whether someone should be granted bail or not. So if you're arrested and then while you're waiting for your trial, should you be given bail so that you can be walking around in the public, potentially harming others or reoffending, or in some cases they think that you're unlikely to reoffend, so they give you bail so that you can continue to live a life while waiting for your trial. Because one of the things is that you don't want to be keeping someone in prison while the person hasn't been adjudged as a criminal, has not been convicted yet. So in the US, they use this algorithm sort of solutions to determine whether someone should be granted bail. And there's a real lack of transparency in terms of they don't know, people wouldn't know what kind of data was being fed in. First of all, because the company that was, the state was using this solution, which belongs to a company which says that their algorithm was trade secret. So no one can assess whether it's accurate or not, what kind of data was put in. And then what certain groups then went on to do was that they engaged in the study and found out that when using that system, the African American populations were twice more likely to be assigned a high risk of reoffending. And then the algorithm also underestimated the risk of reoffending amongst the white people. So things like that happen. And in the US, it's a bit problematic. But what happened in that case was that the judge still said that you didn't have enough evidence to show that there was discrimination, which is understandable because trade secret, you can't get any information to actually prove that there was discrimination. But then the judges then went on to say, in this particular case before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, went on to say that the judges must still give adequate explanation to the factors that were used in their decision making, and not just rely solely on the algorithms. And they must actually give some sort of explanation and also take into consideration of these potential biases when using the risk assessment tools. So I think a few key principles there. One is we need to make sure that whatever decisions that are automated or based on algorithms can be explained to the end users in some sort of non-technical terms. We need to ensure that when the data is being collected, there are certain sort of checks involved to make sure that it's not rubbish in, rubbish out kind of situation. So you need to make sure that there's some checks involved. And you need to make sure that there is a certain log, I think, to ensure that we can, if something happens, we go back to look at what went wrong. But these things I understand, from a very sort of non-technical perspective, might not be always possible in a technical sense. And I think I've spoken to some people who are working on these AI tools. They say it's really not that easy to come up with a system that can comply with all these requirements and still have the kind of functionality that we want. So I'll hand this over to James to hear talk about it from a more technical view.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. I mean, just now you quote an example. I mean, the one is also my so-called my favorite example as well. Right? The system is called Campus, right? They used to decide whether you should get a bail or things like that, right? And yes, I mean, the company didn't really reveal too much of the details. Of course, then it's a fair, right? Because indeed, it's a kind of a trade secret, right? But I mean, the article, probably you quote just now, right? I mean, there's a I guess there's a website. I always can't really pronounce the name. The name of the website is really a bit difficult for me to pronounce. But I guess it's called the ProPublica or something.
ProPublica, right? Yeah.
ProPublica, yes. So they go and do a study of that, right? And they will say, oh no, your system is biased, right? And then after that, the company jump out again. Of course, they try to deny all the so-called accusations, right? But in fact, to a certain extent, right? I mean, from technical point of view, both of them are right. Both of them are right? But then the question is, okay, if you're saying that both of them are right, I'm not biased. The other one saying I'm biased, right? Both of them are right. Then what's the issue over here, right? In fact, the issue is They are using different bias or fairness definition, right? In fact, if you go and study in the literature, now probably it's even more, right? At least I'm personally aware, probably at least the 20 definition of fairness, right? Just happens so two of them, they are using two different definition of fairness. Then of course you will derive a different kind of decisions, right? So each one of them can defend their what they call it, the so-called stance, right? And then you as you rightly point out, GN, right? There are the research, mathematical proof to say that it is difficult to be compliant to more than one definition at the same time, right? There's a very good researcher, a very reputable researcher doing research in that area, right? So I guess that's probably the tricky part if we're talking about bias, right? Yeah. So you really need to be clear, what do we, if you want to say that, okay, my system is fair, right? But what do you mean by fair? I think you first probably need to define what is your definition of a fair, right? Then we talk about whether you have bias or not, right? Without that, I guess it's probably a bit difficult, right? You can say that I'm fair, but you can say that I'm not fair, right? That's one thing. Another thing, I mean, going back to Jacob's earlier question, I mean, so-called the opaque system, or so-called, I mean, something that a lot of people call it the accessibility of the system, right? My personal view is a bit like this, right? A lot of times we are dealing with opacity, right? To a certain extent, even in human decision as well, right? I'm not trying to defend that we don't need to require explainability of the AI system. For sure, we need to, right? I mean, as an AI practitioner, I mean, always tell my team member, I tell myself, we need to build explainable system, right? But we take a step back. It's like a lot of times when human making decisions, we have a lot of opacities, but we live with that, right? Give you an example. You maybe you have some symptom of a flu, right? Or COVID or whatever, right? I mean, like you're having fever or you're having a cough. Then you go to see a doctor. Doctor will tell you, oh, no, based on my, maybe let's say pre-COVID era, right? Doctor look at your symptoms and say, oh, maybe this is just a normal cold, right? It's not really a flu, right? But we, as a non-medical person, we don't really know, right? But I mean, we trust what the doctor kind of a diagnosis us, right? So to a certain extent, there's probably also like some form of, I mean, of course, to doctor, it is not an opaque system because they know the medical. I mean, of course, for sure, they need to know it. If they don't know it, I mean, of course, we start to worry, right? But as a non-medical person, we trust them, although we don't really know how do they really end up with the decision, right, or the diagnosis, right? But we just trust it, right? I mean, a lot of these are kind of examples in your human life, right? So that's why, because probably at the end of the day, I guess probably always an issue of trust, right? Probably AI probably now as probably in the era, it's like we know the technology is evolving or technology is emerging, right? But just that we don't really have the enough level of trust in the technology yet, because there might be two issues to that. I mean, maybe two causes to that. Maybe I'll later I might come to that, right? I personally feel there might be a number of reasons to that, right? But going back to my point is that sometimes maybe it's really an issue about trust, how much trust we put on the system, right? And another example, I mean, the medical is one. Another example is a bit like the autopilot system, right? Flight. I mean, a lot of times, pilot really just, when you go to the cruising attitude, and just really put on the autopilot system, and then just to a certain extent, we kind of hand our life to the pilot, or to a certain extent, right? But we trust that, right? But we don't really know how it really works. It is again the opaque system to us, right? Isn't it? But we just trust that. So to a certain extent, that we really trust the mechanism or the person, right? You won't kill us. But I guess probably at the moment, this just that the AI don't really give us that level of assurance or trust, right? I guess probably we still need to try to gain the trust from the public. Of course, there will be a few things. I mean, as a kind of a practitioner, we probably need to do, right? I mean, usually we look into 4 things. One is like, you need to make sure your AI system in a way is robust. Robust meaning is like you can't be taking one input and give me one output, right? I mean, somehow I introduce a minor permutation or perturbation to the input. You suddenly give me a totally different output, right? Then in a sense, your system is not really robust, right? Of course, this is just my way of defining robust. I mean, if you really go deeper, again, different people might see robust as a different notion, right? So this is probably another issue. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, we need to make sure that our system behave in a stable way, right? That's probably the first thing. Another thing is really about explainability, right? again, it's like, okay, but then again, take a step back. It's not all the decisions need to be explained, and no one. It also depends on the sensitivity or the how critical the action is or decision is, right? Sometimes you don't really need explainability, right? Explanation. Let's say like earlier on we talk about product recommendation. Yes, it will be good that you tell me, okay, because why you receive this recommendation, because some of your friends buy something, right? Or it will be good. But if you without the explanation, it is still okay, right? But for in some other scenarios, without explanation, I can't really accept it. For example, credit rating. You need to give me why I'm getting a lower rating than my friends. I mean, it happened for Apple case, right? Apple Card case. Husband and wife, they stay in the same house, but somehow they go and apply Apple Card. They get different treatment and they get different decisions, right? So you need they kind of in a way they demand a kind of an explanation. Again, that is reasonable, right? So explanation also need to look into the audience. Who are you really explaining it to, right? For an end user and versus a regulator, maybe the level of explainability will be different. Right? So I think what level of explainability we need to give, there's also something I think as a practitioner, we need to think, right? And another one is really about privacy. I think earlier on we talked about privacy, right? You need to make sure that, okay, we really protect the data or the privacy of the subject, right? So they also like, I mean, even in AI Singapore, we are also trying to build something that earlier on I mentioned about federated learning, right? Trying to see how we can build a model in a way that at the same time protect the confidentiality or the privacy of different parties' data, right? I think those are the things that we also look into. Another one is about fairness, right? So fairness, again, we talk about, I mean, how do we really define fairness, right? So I think if we can do this aspect well enough, I think we should be able to gain the trust. I mean, of course, given enough time, right, we should be able to gain trust, or at least the system is behaving in a trustworthy way, right? Trust and trustworthy may be two different issues, but at least you need to show that the system or the model is behaving in a trustworthy manner, right? I guess that's probably one thing we need to do. Another thing is probably sometimes we hold machine and human to different standard. I mean, we lightly touch on as well, right? I mean, a pilot and versus doctor. Sometimes it's probably a different standard, right? I can give you another example. Like recently, again, I'm not trying to defend anyone or anything, right? But look at Tesla, right? There's a lot of accidents. It happens, right? But if you really look at the numbers, right? The what they call it, the number of people that somehow die, I mean, unfortunately, right, due to the accident by the autopilot system deployed in Tesla. I mean, if you look at the rates, it's much lower than human, right? That's one thing. Another thing is like sometimes we really put them into different standard, different tests, different liability tests, right? If let's say somehow now you are a driver, you don't really use the autopilot system, you just drive a normal car, right? And touch wood, somehow you hit into someone or maybe something, right? So I guess from liability point, I mean, even from liability law point of view, we look into whether in a normal situation, a reasonable person, will he take the similar action or not, right? If let's say somehow, I mean, example, right? Very extreme example, let's say totally dark night, and somehow there's some baby, suddenly jump out of blue, dash across the street, and then not enough time for you to react and brake and apply your brake. And then you hit into the baby, and then something bad happened to the baby, right? But to a certain extent, this is really an unavoidable scenario because it's really totally dark, and suddenly the baby jump out, right? You can't really react. You don't have enough time to react. So I think we put into this level of a liability test. But the liability or test we put into autopilot system or things like Tesla is different, right? We demand or we expect them to be performing in a very high manner. We don't really ask, as a reasonable person, would you have enough time to react? We don't really ask them. We look at, okay, you kill a person no matter what, right? So I guess let's probably also have a bit of a legal consequences as well, because legal and liability and a lot of the laws I think probably is human centered, right? So a lot of times it's like, my point is, again, I'm not trying to defend Tesla or anything. It's really like, what kind of a test or what kind of a expectation we have on machine, right? Let me probably explain my earlier point is that because sometimes machine doesn't really give us the level of trust yet, right? But it's always a kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? You need to show me enough what they call it, and then I'll trust you. A bit like that. Actually, probably now is really at that stage. But when we reach a point, is that okay, machine really have the level of trust, same as any other machinery, right? Then I guess probably those things will be less a concern. We don't even thought about it. Just like now we bought the flight, we don't even second guess. Okay, who is flying the flight today, right? What's the track record and things like that. We don't really do that. We just trust, okay, the pilot will not do bad things to me, and the flight will not do something via to us, right? So that in a way, you already reached the level of trust. So I think that's probably my view. I mean, like, yes, there are something that as a technical person we need to address, right? We need to show to the public, okay, my model or my system is really trustworthy, behaving in a predictive manner, right? But sometimes we also need to ask ourselves as a user, right? Are we putting the machines to a different level of expectation or different test, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. Actually, I would love to continue this, but we are supposed to actually have a bit of a Q&A right now. So for those of you in the audience, students, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in chat. Or if you want to, you can use the reaction button to just raise your hand, and then you feel free to unmute your mic and maybe pose a question to either of our panelists. Feel free to do that now. Anyone? In the meantime, while we wait for some students to maybe step forward or type in whatever they want to type in, we actually have some questions that were submitted before the event, so we can by student registrants. So we can look at some of those. Some of the questions are things that we've actually already talked about privacy and what have you. We've got a really interesting question that I'm not sure whether either of you are familiar with. It's about AI in the accounting and finance sector. Either of you familiar with the state of AI there? What's being used there? Are there any potential concerns?
Okay, this one maybe I can provide a little bit of maybe answer, right? I mean, of course, I don't really come from accounting background, right? I have little exposure to accounting. But at least what I noticed that there are some works that try, because accounting at the end of the day is more about, or maybe not more about, I mean, sometimes it's really about trying to identify the fraud in the accounting books, right? So there are some work put into place to detect potential fraud in the accounting practice, right? So there are work putting into that. I guess there was a I forgot the company name, right? So there's quite a big company looking into that, right? And then the technical wise, they are using, basically they are trying to do anomaly detection, basically, right? And then they are using autoencoder to do that, right? I mean, there's I mean, accounting is something that which I'm aware. But if you're talking about finance, right? Maybe I can speak a little bit more because previously I came from reinsurance, right? So, but of course, finance is quite big, right? Finance, including too wide, right? Maybe I can only speak about insurance, maybe, right? So insurance, in fact, there's a lot of applications, right? Probably, if you look at the whole insurance value chain, right? So typically from, I mean, of course, there'll be marketing, right? Marketing in a way that, okay, you have a product, you try to find, in a way, the targeted kind of a campaign, right? You're trying to reach out to person who are more likely to buy your products, right? So you try to do a bit of a profiling of the customer and try to see who are more likely to buy, and then to save your marketing costs, you try to reach out to those who are more likely to buy, right? Then after that, it basically in a way is really about underwriting, right? Underwriting, I mean, for insurance at the end of the day is all about risk, right? So underwriting is basically like you fill in the form and then you submit the form to the company, and the company read your form and try to make a decision whether they want to insure you or not, right? Insure you as a standard life or substandard, right? How much premium they want to charge you, right? So underwriting is, we see a lot of applications as well, right? Because nowadays, I think insurance, they are not just looking into the traditional insurance data. Sometimes they also look into data from other industries as well, right? So they try to, with those additional data, they try to see how they can build or how they can really leverage those data, right? Sometimes even about real-time data, right? Talk about telematics, right? For the motor insurance, right? And then for variables for the life. I hear some echo. Yeah, and then for life insurance, they look into things like a variable data, right? So those are, yes, I mean, in underwriting, we see quite a number of applications, right? And then there will be another one is after your customer buy the policy, there will be another thing is about the what they call it, the claim, right? Claim in a way is like you're trying to in a way again, it's about fraud, right? You try to see whether any particular what they call it, the claim is more likely to be a fraudulent claims, right? So all those you can really apply AI technology or AI machine learning technology in there, right? But I mean, again, just to take a step back, I mean, if you recall the earlier example which I gave, right? You're trying to teach baby about cat and dog, right? As long as you're able to kind of link this cat and dog to something that which you want your system to predict, right? I think you should be able to see some form of application of an AI system, right? So in insurance, I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, the first one is about marketing, right? Or maybe targeted campaign, right? You're trying to see who are more likely to buy your product, right? So one category would be likely to buy, I mean, who has bought your policy before, right? Something like that. And for the underwriting is something more like who are likely to claim in future, right? So for in your historical data, I look into who are those who claim before, right? And then fraudulent claim as well. I mean, I look into historical fraudulent claims and try to build a model to recognize that, right? So in insurance, we see a lot of applications. I guess for banking, probably about the same, right? I mean, there will also be something similar, right?
Probably about loans.
Yeah,
and
loans. Yes, exactly. Loans and credit cards, credit scoring and things like that, and also like fraudulent transactions, right? Yeah.
We have another question that was pre-submitted. It's basically about AI systems and human interactions. Oh, actually, we have a question that's in chat. Maybe we'll deal with that first. This is from Nicholas. I've heard that China's AI tech is really advanced in the sense that personal information can be readily retrieved, open bracket, surveillance capitalism, close bracket, for one to make certain decisions. Is this true, allowed in Chinese law? Maybe Tian, are you familiar with the legal framework there in China with regard to AI?
Well, I'm not familiar as to the substantive law, but even when it comes to, I think the use of AI, I don't think it's that extreme or that advanced as you say, Nicholas, in your message in terms of retrieving personal information easily so that you can make some decision. I mean, there's definitely surveillance, and it feeds into the usual framework where a judge makes a decision where I look at what's the evidence before me, right? So it's not that different from all major, I mean, all legal systems. In fact, I'd say the prosecution equivalent will have to put before the evidence if, say, it's a criminal kind of case to the state to say, to the judge to say, this is what we've gathered. And in that sense, I think the Chinese laws are a bit more they have put in place certain laws to require companies to cooperate, to provide certain information to assist with investigations, and so it's possible simply because you interact in a world where you use a smartphone, say you use WeChat, and WeChat might be subpoenaed to give, maybe ordered by the court to give information to in relation to potential offences you've committed, but that's not really that different as compared to other countries. The innovative part that I say in China is that they have used AI in ways that many other jurisdictions are just starting to look at, in terms of, for instance, using AI in their case management system, where the court can look at of course, a lot of this is still being trialed, but they are trying out in larger scale than other jurisdictions. So, using AI to identify missing documents from a particular case, or analyze evidence in terms of trying to read through say, a person's witness statement and then spot out inconsistency in the statements. And they're also more advanced in terms of automating transcription. You'll be surprised how even in Singapore, very advanced jurisdiction, a lot of time what the judge is doing mostly in court when it's hearing something is taking down notes. It's really not a great way of spending the time, and in fact sort of stops the judge in a way to in terms of absorbing what's happening before him. But so China has, I think this one they've introduced in more advanced stage in terms of being able to automatically transcribe what the witness or what's being said before the court in a relatively high level of accuracy, something 90-something%. And then there will be human touch after that to correct the notes. And I remember speaking to some people working in China and talk about how this has actually made the experience a lot better, because the judge you now have the judge's full attention. Instead of the judge busy typing notes, the judge relies on the system and it will be corrected after that because you have the recording anyway. So far, all these use of legal AI that I'm talking about is very much to assist the judges to function more effectively and really not to replace or somehow be able to automate the making of a certain decision.
So, I mean, to follow up on Nicholas's question, I mean, I've heard, I mean, I'll be very honest with you, one of the things I do during my free time is watch random YouTubers talk about random stuff. Some of them are basically non-Chinese residents in China. And I've heard this thing about getting tickets for jaywalking in an almost kind of automated and kind of immediate way with like street side surveillance cameras, and it just is automatically given. Can anyone say anything or attest to that? Has anyone heard of something like that?
Yeah, I guess but this one, yes. I mean, indeed, in some city, right? I mean, technically it is possible, right? Technically it is possible. Basically, just, I mean, anywhere there's a bit like Singapore, right? There's wherever you go, and no matter where you go, right, probably there'll be a camera somewhere, right? Of course, given that level of kind of a coverage, right? For sure, when you jaywalk, of course they will capture you, right? In a way, and then they probably put up to a kind of a digital display wall, saying, okay, this so and so jaywalking, right? And then because they are probably, the system is probably linked, they will probably display your name there somehow as well, right? Yeah, I mean, technically it's possible. Technically it's possible because they collect all the information. Because when you go and do your IC, I mean, China, they also have an IC system, right? National IC system. Then they will probably collect your IC photos and things like that, right? So I think it certainly is possible, right? I mean, I'm just thinking aloud, right? If you're in Singapore, you want to do some kind of a similar system, technically it's also possible, right? Because I think NRIC is all linked, right? And then when you try to go and apply your passport, your photo is also there, right? You just need to match. You capture a live image, and then you just need to go to the database and do the facial recognition, right? Technically, I mean, I have been doing this for probably more than 20 years, right? Certainly it is possible. Certainly it's possible. But whether you want to do it or not, why you want to do it, right? That is probably a question. Again, always, right? I mean, technology is just a technology, right? It is really very much depending on how you really apply it, right? And why you want to apply it.
Yeah, I mean, a current example that we already see being used is in terms of recognition of car plates. If you commit a traffic offense, automatically it's recognized. You get a summons after that, automatically, right?
Yeah. But on that, right? I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, GN mentioned, it just remind me another thing in US, right? In US, there's a number of systems, at least one or two, right? Based on my understanding. At least one of them I know clearly, right? So they go and build a database from all the online photos. You don't really know, you didn't even give them a consent, right? They go and crawl all the photos, and they build a huge database, and then they sell it to the law enforcement agency, right? Police, the ICE, and things like that, right? Then the police, I mean, a law enforcement agent can go into the system. And if you want to match, let's say, a suspect, right, you can go in there and do that, right? I think they also use probably the same system to capture someone in the Capitol riot, right? And there was also probably some application in there. So, yeah, I mean, of course, then the US, I mean, I remember it was probably NYPD, right? NYPD, the probably the commissioner was saying, no, I don't recall the detail, but basically they were saying they're trying to deny, right? But in fact, some of the email leak out, they were saying, in fact, they do sign a kind of a deal, a contract with this particular company, right? And then and then some of the police they indeed submit query to the system, right? And then they even request the system to be installed in their personal computer, not just in the work computer, right? So this kind of thing. I mean, again, I mean, you take a step back. Of course, you will help the law enforcement agency, right? Because now you just need a photo, and then you have a place to search. Okay, who is the bad guy, right? I mean, of course, as the police, you will love it, right? To a certain extent, you will love it. But of course, from a private point of view, this now there's no privacy to a certain extent. Certainly, there's no privacy because I didn't even give you my consent, right? Because you go and I don't even know where you crawl my photo, right? Probably my social media post or whatever, right? And then you go and do it, and then you sell it to the law enforcement agency, right? So there's I guess I mean in any, not just about China, in any country, law enforcement, I guess probably we need to put I don't know, I mean, the way I say it, probably a very naive thoughts, right? I mean, law enforcement, maybe we should allow the usage of this kind of system to a certain extent, right? To a certain extent. Of course, again, always a bit that, I mean, what would be the reasonable and acceptable range? I don't know. This one probably every jurisdiction, every government, every administration probably need to answer this question. But right. Technology-wise, yes, it is definitely possible. Yeah, definitely possible. Yeah.
We've got a question from Benjamin. It's about AI and human jobs. There's always been the question of whether AI will replace human jobs and maybe causing labor displacement. Do you think the economic value of AI is greater than the social impact it can cause? Maybe I can add on to this and maybe you can help us out. I think a lot of people very frequently forget that this concern about blank, right? Something replacing jobs has been around for forever. Right, in the sense, early industrial automation also led to similar fears about unemployment and job loss. That didn't happen then because you have this situation where new job types or new roles emerge very quickly, right? But I think Benjamin's comment is quite appropriate because there are fears that AI-based automation is going to be different. Because of the ease with which such automation can be replicated and set up compared to, conventional physical industrial age automation, where you still got to literally sometimes set up a physical infrastructure, such that new job creation won't keep up with job loss. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Do you think these concerns are warranted?
I'm happy to comment in the legal space, right? I think
I thought
Jacob, you mentioned earlier. In terms of making it harder to get training contracts and something along those lines. And so I think, as you said, Jacob, this has always been there. This issue of technology replacing jobs. And to a certain extent, I think we should welcome it because it sort of reduces inefficiencies and it creates better roles. Typically, I think in the past, we've seen better roles being created and incomes going higher. So I think if we look at how AI is replacing sort of people in the legal industry, as long as it fulfills these criteria in terms of increasing efficiency, increasing access to justice, and increasing wages for those people who are in this sector, I think it's something to be welcome and in terms of economic value. But obviously, you have a huge range of jobs in terms of in the legal sector. That it's still the same thing. I think fundamentally, there will be new jobs being created. So we are starting to see more and more of what we call the legal technologist kind of role, where someone has to know both the legal and the tech and how the two interact. Because quite often lawyers are not the best in terms of technology, and they don't really know how to use technology systems, or they don't know what are the issues that technology systems give rise to. So we start seeing these roles. We start seeing legal project managers where their role involve sort of managing cases in a way that's quite different from what we see in the past, because the legal projects are now, it's becoming more like, you're in a tech firm and you have to manage a product, and then you become a product manager. And here we're not that different, because some cases that we do are multi-billion dollars in nature, and there are so many moving pieces where you actually need some sort of project manager to run it. So you see this kind of new roles being created, which comes together with technology. And then there are some roles that are very difficult also. So there are the roles that are new, and there are roles that are very difficult to be replaced by AI in terms of, say, advocacy. To a certain extent, when it comes to high level, sort of specialized advocacy, it's still very much, I think we're still quite far away from being able to replace these sort of counsel. So there will be that. And of course, there's everything in between. And so I guess my point is that we have to understand where we stand in this food chain. What are the services that we do that can be automated, that cannot be automated, and then decide, how can we move ourselves to a place where whatever we do, it is harder to automate, and also whatever that we're doing as a result of us being able to leverage on technology, we're now more efficient, and hence we get more pay. So these three different aspects I'll look at.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, sorry, yeah, go.
No, yeah, Chenchu, do you have any thoughts? But maybe can you keep it a bit shorter, because we have, I think, 2 more questions.
Sure.
One more.
Sure,
yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree what Jian was sharing, right? I mean, there's always a, my view is always that it's not really to try to replace. I mean, of course, there will be so-called displacement effect, but there's another one is a bit like the productivity effect, right? I mean, indeed, it will be, in a way, it's trying to release us from repetitive tasks, because there's something that a machine can do better, right? And then release us from those tasks, and we can focus more on a value added kind of a task, right? So I think that's why I certainly agree with what Jian is saying. But of course, maybe probably slightly different, which I can also see that probably, because now I think the technology advanced to a stage is like you're really touching a very high level cognitive task, right? Things like decision making, things like perception. So those is really at a different level as any other in the industrial revolution which can give us previously, right? So maybe another question is how much productivity gain we can have, right, versus the displacement effect which the technology advancement bring us, right? So there are also some researchers look into, they call it like social technology. Social technology meaning like you basically displace job more than additional productivity gain you bring on the table, right? So there are also like researchers, I mean, think tanks looking into this as well. Yeah, but I mean, like, in the interest of time, maybe I'll just stop there. Yeah.
We have another question from Kalisa. It's something related to something that we've talked about earlier with regard to algorithmic bias. I've heard that the deployment of AI may have an indirect effect on marginalized or disadvantaged communities because of algorithm bias. For example, the European police forces have been developing and piloting predictive mapping and identification systems to help them preemptively intervene and deter crime. Since this is due to the programmer, I suppose this requires a government's intervention, possibly to create legislation from the start to protect these communities. But what are your thoughts on this?
Maybe I take a first step, right, and see whether maybe Jian can supplement later as well, right? Okay, maybe I'll try to use probably a different example, right? Maybe more in a like credit rating, right, or maybe loan or underwriting kind of a scenario. I mean, yes, I mean if we talk about so-called of buyers or fairness, right? I mean, like in the current finance system, there will be a group of people which maybe because of some reason, right, they just can't really get loans for some reason, according to the current rules or standards, we just can't get it, right? So that also means that you don't have enough data about those people if you want to build a model, right? But now if you're saying that, okay, no, your model is not fair, and then you try to make it fair, right? Of course, there are multiple ways for you to make it fair. One way is that you just lower your threshold, saying, okay, for this group of people, I always try to give them lower than their rating score by X percentage, then so that they get eligible for a loan. Then in a way, you try to artificially create the fairness, right? From a fairness point, I mean, again, going back to the earlier point, you need to define fairness first, but assuming that we are able to define, okay, every group should have an equal chance of getting a loan, something like that, right? Then in a way that you manipulate your result to a certain extent, that you artificially create a fair kind of a outcome, right? Unbiased kind of a model, right? Yes, in the shorter term, they will benefit because they get the loan, right? But I guess longer term wise, because systematically they really don't have the means to repay back the loan, right? Then longer term wise, if you give them loan, but now indeed they can't really repay your loan, right? Then they leave a very bad credit report, and then in future, you have enough real data to say no to those group of people because indeed they can't really repay that loan. So okay. The point of which I want to bring out is really about sometimes when you try to address the issue bias, right? It's not just at a technical level. It's really a lot of upstream and downstream implications. We need to think carefully, right? It's not really just about, okay, now the model is not fair. Now I need to make it fair, right? I need to really make it like, okay, every group is equal. But it might create some form of other implications, upstream and downstream implications, which you may be aware or you may not be aware, right? But I mean, it will create a real consequences for those people initially you try to protect. It might even adversely impact those group of people, right? I think this is probably the point at which I want to, and you really want to address that. It's really a systematic issue. It's not just about the model level. Maybe the finance system, the whole social welfare system may also need to be kind of changed, right? So that was probably the point which I want to bring out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think most directly to this Lisa's question is really about yes, I think there will be some sort of framework that's created to protect these communities. And as Jinshu says, that the kind of framework is probably not purely technical in terms of making sure that the system has no bias, but it has to be more wide-ranging if the government has like real, I suppose, political will to solve this problem. They have to look at all kinds of problems. But in terms of just looking at algorithmic bias, I think we've touched on this earlier on, so fairness in terms of, ensuring there's some sort of explainability to that. I think in the EU, there's this concept which, if you're interested, you might want to look into in terms of the draft framework talking about this conformity assessment body, which essentially is sort of like what Jinshu was talking about in terms of examples earlier on with autopilot systems, right? It's not that different from, say, once you've created an autopilot system for a plane, you want to put it through sort of product safety testing and making sure that everything is tested properly. And so one of the things that they test for might be bias, right? So it's the same. And it's sort of like in a medical doctors kind of example is about, doctors having to go through medical school, having to take exams and so on. It's essentially having a certain body to test out all the things that we need to test before we can introduce it into the system so that people have some sort of way to say, I can trust this because it has been tested by the experts, kind of thing.
Yeah, agree. In fact, on that note, right, it happens so that AI Singapore is also working with a number of so-called different parties from both public sector and the private sector to set up some form of a standard, right? Although we don't really call it a standard, we call it a technical reference, but of course, technical reference eventually can evolve into a standard in terms of how we are going to evaluate or assess a model, right? Exactly what Dion was trying to say, right? I mean, eventually we're trying to see whether we can some form of a stamp, right? So this model has been tested or assessed by some party, right? And then according to a certain standard, right? So those are the things that AI Singapore is, at the moment, is working with a number of different parties from public sector and the private sector in this. Yeah.
Thanks so much for gracing this event. If I can maybe summarize some of what we've talked about. I am an educator after all. It's kind of something that I do. I mean, it seems like what we've talked about today a lot of the issues that we've raised, everything from bad data being fed to machine learning systems to a lack of trust due to maybe the novelty of the particular system to holding any kind of non-human system to somewhat different standards than we do normal human beings, who we expect some degree of fallibility, and we accept some degree of fallibility, but we somehow just absolutely don't, maybe unreasonably, for machine systems. It seems like a lot of the issues that we've talked about today have less to do with the tech itself seems like it's got less to do with the AI or the machine learning systems in and of themselves, and more to do with kind of us, right? Like the policies that we've made, the individuals who have made the decisions about what kind of data to feed or collect, feed the machine learning systems in the first place. Is that what seems to be an appropriate takeaway for both of you, if you were to summarize what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree, right? But maybe I'll put a different spin to it, right? I mean, for sure, it is not just about technology, right? But technology is also important, right? But I mean, I would say probably there's a kind of a triad kind of thing, right? There's always a bit like a technology and human, and also the process and maybe regulation as well, right? I guess those three probably need to come hand in hand. It's not just about technology advancement, right? Yes, we need a better technology. I mean, in terms of not just about better performance, a better behaving probably, right? I mean, make it a more, I mean, we talk about expandability, we talk about robustness. I mean, those four aspects we mentioned earlier on, right? But it is all about human, right? We need to educate the what they call it, the developers, right? And we probably also need to educate the users as well. The user also, going back to my earlier point, right? Sometimes we probably have a different, or maybe not the right level of expectations, right? So that one probably also need a bit of a education, right? And then for sure there will be non-technical side, which is about the regulation and process, right? So I think this is probably something we need both the technical committee and also maybe regulator, maybe even legal community to work together. It's really kind of a trial kind of a thing. Yeah. But I mean, you certainly summarized it very well. Yeah, summarized very well.
Tian, any last words? Any final things to add?
No, I really agree with Jianshu and yourself in terms of, I think in summary, when it comes to AI and ethics, it's really the relationship between human and technology, and a lot of these issues that we have already exist when in terms of our interaction with existing non-AI technologies, but AI has sort of amplified some issues that we discussed earlier, and so we now have to deal with these issues with greater urgency, I think, and to look at it seriously, and hopefully that will put us in a good position to leverage all the potential efficiencies in I guess just allow us to have better lives with AI. And thank you so much for inviting me here, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed listening to Jianshu's analysis. It's very insightful.
Thank you so much, Jianshu and Tian. I'll pass the time back to Lorraine. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Jacob, for moderating the discussion. Thank you, Jianshu and Jian, for sharing the relevant technical and legal sides relating to privacy and ethical concerns, as well as the risks of using AI and machine learning. Thanks to our guests, everyone in the chat for sharing your views and on the questions as well. I hope everyone had a fruitful time and insightful discussion tonight. On behalf of AIIG, I thank you all, and please fill up our event feedback form